Good morning. Today's lecture is not about the actual conduct of the Civil War. It is, however, about a very important aspect of the war, and that is why men fought. Why men, both of the North and of the South, fought in the beginning of the war and then chose to continue fighting in most cases throughout the entire 4 years of a very bloody conflict. Of course, the exceptions being those who were wounded, killed, and a few who chose not to continue the fight. And in this lecture, I am following the renowned historian, Pulitzer Prize winning author of Battle Cry of Freedom, James McPherson, who wrote a smaller book called For Cause and Comrades. And so the title of the lecture is We Were in Earnest. Before I begin the lecture today, though, I want to read a short passage from the Bible, Book of Matthew, chapter 5, the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We were in earnest. Americans saw their union in terms of a marriage which had begun in 1776. But by 1858, the marriage was in serious trouble. To use Lincoln's metaphor, the house was on the verge of being divided. By 1861, one part of this troubled family was intent on setting up their own home because they feared that Father Abraham was determined to deprive them of their most valuable possessions, their slaves. Indeed, on a per capita basis, Southerners were more wealthy than Northerners, and the primary reason for this was because they owned property, the property of slaves. The breakup literally pitted brother against brother. James and John Welsh grew up in the Shenandoah Valley of Virginia, sometimes referred to as the breadbasket of the South. In 1853, James, now a young man, moved to Illinois, clearly a northern state. There, he became a Republican. Remember that Lincoln was from Illinois. He became a Republican and voted for Lincoln in the 1860 election. When the South attacked Fort Sumter in April of 1861, James wrote to his brother John, who remained in Virginia. It's easy to remember that John was a Southerner, Johnny Reb. He wrote to John that, and I quote from the letter, Jeff Davis and his crew of pirates had committed treason and nothing less. John responded that he was very much pained to find that I have a brother who would advocate sending men down here to butcher his own friends and family. I intend to vote for secession today because I don't intend to submit to black Republican rule. John continued to tell James that by becoming a Republican, he had forsworn, quote, home, mother, father, and brothers, and had sacrificed all of that for the dear, and here he uses the N word, I'll just say the dear slaves. James, stung by John's rebuke, responded, He responded that he never dreamed, and I quote now, a brother of his would raise a hand to tear down the glorious stars and stripes, a flag that we have been taught from our cradle to look on with pride. I would strike down my own brother if he dare raise a hand to destroy that flag. We have to rise in our might, he continued, as a free, independent nation, and demand that law shall be respected, or we shall find ourselves wiped from the face of the earth, and the principles of free government dashed to the ground forever. So James, the Republican from Illinois, is fighting for the end of slavery and the preservation of the Union. And to that cause, he attaches the salvation of democracy. For the United States was the only democracy worth mentioning in the world at that time. And if it were to be destroyed, if it were to be demonstrated that a democratic nation could not hold itself together, that might well be the end of democracy in the world. The two brothers never wrote or spoke to each other again. John enlisted in the 27th Virginia Regiment and James in the 78th Illinois. And John was killed at Gettysburg. James survived the war. Why fight? The initial impulse for war came from what the French call the rage militaire, a patriotic fervor that swept North and South alike. All across America, towns and cities erupted into volcanoes of oratory and recruiting rallies. One Harvard professor born during Washington's presidency in the 1790s wrote, I never knew what a popular excitement can be. The whole population, men, women, children, seemed to be in the streets waving flags. It was the same in the South. One 18-year-old student at the University of Virginia wrote, no studying today. The news of Virginia's secession, they just received the news, reached here about 10 o'clock. Amid huzzas and shouts, war, war. The scum of the North cannot face the chivalric spirit of the South. There's a great scene in Gone with the Wind early in the movie when word of the war's arrival comes to this party at a plantation. And when the Southerners realize that war has begun, the young men all whoop and holler and they run off to either join a regiment or to rejoin their regiments or whatever. More permanent motivation. There was more to the motivation for war than the rage militaire of the moment. If it were not so, the war could not have lasted as long as it did. So what kept men fighting once the rage militaire, once the adrenaline, the excitement had worn off? Many soldiers explained their reasons in letters home. Lincoln had said that secession was the essence of anarchy, for it defied the Constitution and the rule of law. Union volunteers echoed these words. This contest is not the North against the South, wrote one young Philadelphia soldier. It is government against anarchy. It is law against disorder. An Indiana lawyer who became a brigadier general wrote to his Quaker wife. Here's a task of trying to convince her that the war was necessary and just. Of course, if you're not familiar with Quakers, you know that they're if you are familiar with Quakers, you know that they're pacifists. He said, it is better to have war for 1 year than anarchy and revolution for 50. If the government should allow rebels to go on with their work, there would be no end to it. And in a short time, we would be without any law and order. He, as many people of the time, saw in the future, and Lincoln made this point on several occasions, that if secession became a precedent, then other states would secede, perhaps over other issues, the tariff or whatever, and that the future would be a constant stream of secession. And not only would states secede from the Union, but counties or parts of states would secede from states. This is exactly what happened with West Virginia and Virginia. Anarchy, chaos versus law and order. So the continued existence of the Union, of law and order, of respect for democracy, of elections, was present in the minds of Union soldiers. There was also the idea of preserving the revolutionary heritage, of preserving the nation the founding fathers had created. And both sides looked at this. Both sides were felt an allegiance to the founding fathers and to the revolutionary heritage. This is, and I'll just, this as an aside, this is not the case today. One group of Americans today is very much opposed to any kind of an allegiance to the idea that America was a great nation and that there's much worth preserving in the American past. And the reason for this, of course, is that they would like to see radical change. The thought process behind that is if you destroy a people's attachment to their past, you pave the way for a radically different future. Well, anyway, I want to come back to the point that both sides, the Southerners and the Northerners, were very much in believing that they were representing the revolutionary heritage, the heritage of the founding fathers. So this is a war about preserving as opposed to arguing for radical change. So preserving the idea of the revolutionary heritage of preserving the nation the founding fathers had created. Union soldiers, even though they're looking for a revolutionary change in terms of slavery, believe they inherited the nation from the glorious generation of 1776. Shame would be forever attached to their generation if they were not worthy of preserving that union. And recall, the founding fathers had believed that slavery was on the road to extinction, that it would gradually die out. So there was the basis of that claim there. A young Ohio lawyer wrote to his wife, who had strenuously opposed his enlistment, "If our institutions prove a failure and our country be numbered among the things that were, but are not, of what value will be house, family, friends?" Then, too, some Union soldiers fought for the slave from the very beginning. And those who did fight for the black men were outspoken in their opinions. They were determined to destroy the slave power and to cleanse America and the restored Union of an evil they considered to be a mockery of the American ideals of freedom and equality. But these people are in a minority. And this is not Lincoln. One of them wrote, "The main purpose of this wicked rebellion was to secure the extension of that blighting curse, slavery, over our land." An Ohio officer believed that the war will not be ended until the subject of slavery is finally and forever settled. It has been a great curse to this country. The Southerners' view. If many Union soldiers fought to end slavery, one wonders if many Southerners admitted that they were fighting to maintain slavery. Many Southerners did indeed avow the defense of slavery as a motive for fighting. Why should they be ashamed of fighting for an institution, slavery, when most of them believed that that institution was a positive, a necessary good, not a necessary evil, but a necessary good? Southerners at the time of the founding fathers thought it was a necessary evil. By this time, however, most Southerners thought it was a necessary good. One young Southerner wondered why his father was so reluctant to secede when it was clear, and I quote, that Lincoln's government would use its utmost endeavors for the abolishment of slavery. He continued, better, far better, endure all the horrors of civil war than to see the dusky sons of Ham leading the fair daughters of the South to the altar. There are a lot of misconceptions in this letter, in this Southerner's point of view. First, in the first year and a half, even 2 years of the war, Lincoln's government was not about abolishing slavery immediately. It was about gradually ending slavery. And second, it was very common for Southerners to argue from the book of Genesis in the Bible that the sons of Ham, the sons of Canaan, Ham's son, had been cursed, and that they had been cursed to slavery. There's absolutely no DNA connection between African Americans or even Africans with the sons of Ham, Canaan, but nevertheless, this was a common belief that the Bible had placed the sons of Canaan and the sons of Canaan into perpetual servitude, slavery. Well, a young Kentucky physician told his slave-holding relatives that he would join the Confederate forces. And I quote, who are battling for their rights. We must all fight, and I choose to fight for Southern rights and Southern liberties. The pairing of slavery and liberty as the twin goals for which Confederates fought appeared in many letters and newspaper articles and so forth. But Lincoln sarcastically referred to this fact. He said, the perfect liberty they, Confederates, sigh for is the liberty of making slaves of other people. Duty, honor, and conscience. The consciousness of duty was pervasive in Victorian America. Union soldiers filled their letters with such phrases as, I went to war from a sense of duty, and if my regiment re-enlists, it would be my duty to go. He wouldn't want to let down his friends in the regiment. And finally, I must sacrifice personal feelings to go do my duty in the hour of danger. Here's a soldier that really didn't want to go, but he felt it was his duty to do so. Many Northern men found this language of duty essential in persuading reluctant parents or wives to agree to allowing them to serve in the Union Army. And by the way, this is Thomas Toohey's Medal of Honor. Toohey won the Medal of Honor because he refused to abandon an artillery battery when everyone else had. And so he strove to continue to keep at least one of the guns firing. Well, the son of a wealthy Bostonian who could easily have purchased the replacement. Yes, in those days in the Union Army, a wealthy person could purchase a replacement to go in his stead. One of the results of the Civil War is that that practice was abandoned. He wrote to his father after his junior year at Harvard, it is everyone's duty to enlist. And why is it not mine as much as other people's? Well said. If you are not willing to send your sons, why should other people send theirs? Southerners also spoke of duty, but more likely to speak of honor. Honor for a Southerner was one's public reputation, one's image in the eyes of others. A sergeant in the 24th Mississippi Regiment wrote to his sister, I would much rather be numbered among the slain than among those that stay at home, for it will be a brand upon their name forever as a Southerner lives. To be a coward and stay at home, to shirk one's duty then, was to be branded forever. Honor was primarily a masculine concept, not always appreciated by wives, girlfriends, or even mothers, who sometimes felt that a man's duty was to home and family and not to the Confederate cause. Southern males often found it necessary to lecture their wives on the male code. A 39-year-old father of several daughters wrote, "I would be disgraced if I stayed at home, and unworthy of my revolutionary ancestors." There's the revolutionary heritage again. "I stand alone in my family. There is no one bearing my name left to fight for our freedom. The honor of our family is involved. A man who will not offer up his life does dishonor to his wife and children." There is indeed a degree of truth to the stereotype of a Southern society as one in which a profound sense of honor, again defined as a concern for one's public reputation, was well established. But the Yankees also spoke of honor. Charles Francis Adams, the great grandson of John Adams, second president of the United States, rejected the wishes of his father to stay out of the war. He wrote, for years our family has talked of slavery and the South and been most prominent in the contest of words. And now that it has come to blows, it seems to me almost disgraceful that in after years we should have it to say that of them all, not one of your sons stood in arms for that government with which our family history is so closely and honorably connected. Rutherford B. Hayes, who after the war would become president of the United States, declared, "I would prefer to go into it," that is the war, "even if I knew I was to die in the course of it, than to live without taking part in it." So both North and South, the sense of duty and honor compelled men to serve, to fight, and to die. A soldier in the 20th Illinois Regiment wrote, "I'm determined to stand up to my duty and preserve my manhood and honor, let come what may." And a fellow American in the 8th Missouri wrote the same thoughts. Remember that Missouri is a divided state, but a lot of men from Missouri fought for the South. "I would be less than a man if in any way I fell short of the discharge of my duty at my country's call." Moreover, the real soldiers had nothing but disdain for those who lagged behind in a battle or skulked out of a battle. One of the milder references to these men was written by a Michigan man. You see, men were aware of what other soldiers did who were around them. He wrote, "Anyone who cannot stand the hardships and dangers of war had better pack his knapsack and go home to his mother." This tough-minded soldier was killed at Williamsburg. What is a man? Two versions of manhood competed in the Civil War era, indeed in most times. And there are many variations, of course. On the one hand was the hard drinking, gambling, whoring, two-fisted free spirit. On the other was the sober, responsible, dutiful son or husband. Some soldiers found that the war transformed them from the former to the latter. The sinful habits of one young man from Baltimore had driven his mother to her sickbed in despair. In a sudden fit of remorse, he decided to enlist in the hope that I should at some point be engaged in a battle and there have an end put to my worthless career. So somebody will kill me, and then at least my mother's misery will be over. To his surprise, the Army sobered him up, developed a sense of responsibility in him, taught him self-respect, promoted him to sergeant, and, in his own words, made a man of me. Knights of the Round Table. Then, too, some young men enlisted for sheer adventure, to become a hero, perhaps. A Pennsylvania cavalry recruit wrote, "How often in boyhood's young days, when reading the account of soldiers' lives, have I longed to be a man, and now the opportunity has offered." Similarly, the son of a South Carolina planter wrote home, "I am blessing Sir Walter Scott." This is a very important point. Sir Walter Scott's novel Ivanhoe, about knights and honor and manly virtue and so forth, was very popular, especially in the South. There was a whole genre of these kinds of books, and Walter Scott was the chief author in this genre. Anyway, this South Carolina planter wrote home, "I am blessing Sir Walter Scott daily for teaching me how to rate knightly honor, and our noble ancestry for giving me such a state to fight for." One historian has gone so far as to say if it hadn't been for Walter Scott and this notion of knightly honor, that the Civil War may not have been fought. That's probably a stretch, but that's how important this concept is. Though this young soldier was wounded at the Battle of Bull Run, his ardor, his enthusiasm for the cause was not dimmed. He wrote, "I am like a knight in a beleaguered fortress, and must not pass out with the women and the sick. When the castle is to be stormed, so long as I can put on my harness and wield my blade, he hopes to rise from his sick bed and die fighting." Samuel Eliot Morison, of course, recaptures this Knights of the Round Table aspect of Southern society. Morison, then, the author of your text. The real motives. Though men mentioned these romantic motives for fighting, most referred to patriotism and ideology, political ideology. Nevertheless, many historians over the years, have discounted the statements in letters and newspapers about this. They have been reluctant to take these letters and, again, newspaper articles at face value because the sentiments in them do not agree with their own preconceived philosophies or political ideals. Progressive historians who dominated the discipline of history in the first half of the 20th century, in particular, argued that references to patriotism and ideology are a facade. Not true. You have to ignore that. They are a mask to the true motives of personal glory, heroism, and adventure. And I would also add that progressive historians placed economic gain at the forefront of the reasons why the two regions fought one another. The North, according to this interpretation, was trying to economically subdue the South. It had nothing to do with slavery. But this kind of analysis is not history. Remember the definition of history. You have to have proof. You have to have primary sources, preferably written primary sources. And this kind of analysis is not done with other subjects where you ignore what primary documents than are and just write your political views. Unless there is a clear reason why the words in these private letters should be ignored or discounted, then the historian, if objectivity is valued, must relate what was said and make that the thesis. Sadly, too many historians, even today, do not do this. As historian James McPherson, I referenced McPherson earlier, has written in regard to this problem, the historian must be careful not to read too much between the lines of soldiers' letters. We cannot know that those who wrote of duty, honor, country were concealing other motives. So unless there is a very, very good reason for discounting the words, then one has to accept the words. We do know that duty, honor, country were valued in America at this time, and it should be no surprise then to find that these ideas are referenced in letters to loved ones. Finally, while some soldiers sought glory, some adventure, and most were motivated by the rage militaire to begin with, these are the kinds of motives that dissipate quickly when the reality of war strikes home. By the way, the picture that you're looking at now is from the motion picture Gettysburg, and it is a motion picture, but Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain's behavior at Little Round Top suggests that the actor Jeff Daniels here has captured him. The 20th Maine put up a ferocious fight that day. McPherson argues that something else must have motivated these men, both North and South. He writes, "It is impossible to understand how the huge volunteer armies of the Civil War could have come into existence and sustained such heavy casualties over 4 years unless many of these volunteers really meant what they said about a willingness to die for the cause." And by the way, while I'm thinking of it, Chamberlain, during the battle for Little Round Top, will literally grab one of his brothers and put them into a hole in the line. So let me conclude with the words of a soldier in a Pennsylvania regiment. When we enlisted in this war, we did no thoughtless thing. We were in earnest. 1 year has passed away, and all the fancied romance of campaign life has proved itself to be stern reality to us. Yet, we are still in earnest. We are ready for another year of harder, bloodier work, if such is necessary to crush this wicked rebellion. Well, I thank you for your attention, and as always, I pray that you receive God's grace through faith. In Jesus' name, amen.